Jobs English, Walter Isaacson. Introduction. Walter Isaacson only agreed to write Steve Jobs' biography when he learned that Jobs was already dying of cancer. With his striking personality, Jobs approached Isaacson a couple of times since 2004 about the story of his life. It was only in year 2009 that the author agreed. At that time, Jobs was already taking his second medical leave. Being a managing editor at Time magazine, Isaacson encountered Jobs several times since 1984. The first time the innovator mentioned his biography to the writer, Isaacson had just successfully released his book on Benjamin Franklin and was working on another about Albert Einstein. Isaacson declined, saying that it's too early, as Jobs was still on the peak of his career. It was Jobs' wife, Laurene Powell, who finally changed Isaacson's mind and informed him of the Apple CEO's sickness. Jobs was having his operation for cancer, yet he strives to keep his struggle a secret. What further inspired Isaacson to write this biography is the freedom given by Jobs in writing this book. He let the author to write his own life story, as is without any intervention whatsoever. Like Franklin and Einstein, Steve Jobs values his capabilities on both humanities and sciences. His creative talents combined with engineering genius made him the great innovator that he is. Jobs' work not only revolutionized the world of personal computers, but also that of music, digital publishing, and animated movies. His life and personality may not be perfect, yet it continues to inspire people, just as the company he built. Childhood. Steve Jobs knew at an early age that he was adopted. His father, Paul Jobs, and mother, Clara Hagopian, never hid it from him. They took care of Steve right after his birth. Colleagues have remarked that this made Steve independent and strong of character. His first hero is his father, who was a car mechanic. Steve's parents always told him that he is special. As a child, he discovered his intelligence in electronics, though he was a delinquent in school. Classes often bore him, and he would often engage in pranks with the help of his talents. This continued on from grade school to college. Wozniak. Steve Wozniak met Steve Jobs through a common friend in Homestead High. Both Steves showed talents in electronics and machines, even as children. While Jobs was influenced by his father to be a businessman, Woz's dad despised marketing and encouraged him to excel on engineering. Though Woz is 5 years older than Jobs, he was very socially awkward and grew up to be a nerd. It was in their common friend's garage when he first met Jobs. Not only their deep understanding of electronics bind them, but also their love of Bob Dylan's music. College dropout. While Wozniak decided to go to Berkeley University, Jobs was picky in choosing where to study college. It was a condition when Jobs was adopted that he would finish school. And so, his adoptive parents worked hard for his college fund. Jobs chose not to go to nearby Stanford University. He wanted to go somewhere more interesting and artistic. Despite the disagreement with his parents, Jobs enrolled in Reed College, Portland, Oregon. It was an expensive school with only 1,000 students. Yet, it was known for its hippie culture. Later on at Reed, Jobs thought that his course wasn't letting him to learn stuff that he wants. He dropped out and took any class that interests him, like calligraphy. Jobs fell in love with the hippie culture in Reed. He read so many books on Zen Buddhism and started to practice extreme vegetarianism. He would not cut his hair and insist on walking barefoot around campus. Apple I. Wozniak and Jobs had been into various small business ventures here and there. But as Wozniak was just willing to give away his designs, Jobs wanted to have his own unique independent product and make good money out of it. First, they had to come up with a name. They thought about touchy terms like Matrix and boring ones like Personal Computers, Inc. But it was Apple which stood out. It wasn't only that Jobs came from a visit on a farm, but the name Apple Computers is fun, unique, and not intimidating. At the time, Woz was working for HP. He tried to pitch his circuit board there first. After being rejected for rawness, Woz committed his designs 100% to Apple. Jobs thought that their team-up worked because they are opposites. While Woz is very talented but socially awkward, Jobs is good with people. He is known to communicate to anyone and manipulate them to get what he wants. Their first client is a computer store owner named Paul Terrell. He ordered 50 circuit boards for $500 per piece. After convincing the manager of Kramer Electronics to lend them $25,000, Jobs, together with Woz, his sister Patty, ex-girlfriend Elizabeth Holmes, and friend Daniel Kotke, began to work. Thus, the birth of Apple happened in the garage of the Jobs residence in Los Altos. Lisa. For 5 years, Jobs was in an on and off relationship with Chrisanne Brennan. With the successful run of Apple, Jobs moved out of his parents' house and rented a $600 ranch house in Cupertino. Soon, Brennan reunited with Jobs, moved in, and got pregnant. They were both 23 years old. Jobs was detached, though, and focused with the company. He and Brennan would often argue. Marriage was never discussed, and Jobs denied that he was the father. Nevertheless, with the help of friends, Brennan gave birth to Lisa Nicole in Oregon on May 17, 1978. Mother and child moved to a tiny home in Menlo Park and lived on welfare. When Lisa was 1 year old, Jobs underwent the fairly new DNA testing and resulted 94.41%. The California court ordered him to give monthly child support and sign admission of his paternity. Jobs was granted visitation rights, though he didn't use them. 1981. From selling 2,500 units in 1977, Apple's sales rose to 210,000 by 1981. However, Jobs knew that this success wouldn't last forever. He thought of a new product which is much better than Apple II. He also wanted a design that he could completely call his own. Though he denied the connection at the time, Jobs named the new computer Lisa. The engineers had to come up with an acronym to go with his daughter's name. Lisa stands for Local Integrated Systems Architecture. In exchange for 100,000 shares in Apple, Xerox PARC agreed to share its latest technology to Jobs and his programmers. After several visits, the Apple engineers were able to pirate the mouse design and interface of Xerox computers. The Lisa was released with a better-than-ever graphics and smooth-scrolling mouse features. IPO. Apple finally went public on December 12, 1980. One of the banks who handled its IPO was Morgan Stanley. Overnight, the price of Apple shares increased from $22 to $29. At age 25, the hippie college dropout Steve Jobs became a multi-millionaire. Yet, he chose not to live an ostentatious lifestyle. Jobs gave his parents $750,000 worth of Apple stocks, which freed them from mortgage. He also began to do covers for magazines. His first cover story was for Inc. on October 1981. Time magazine soon followed on February 1982. It highlighted the story of a 26-year-old millionaire who started a company 6 years ago in his parents' garage. Jobs was actually kicked out of the Lisa project because of his disruptive behavior. There was an Apple engineer by the name of Jeff Raskin who was developing a cheap computer that any family can afford. Raskin called his project Macintosh after his favorite kind of apple. However, since he lost Lisa, Jobs had his eye on Raskin's project. The vision of Raskin was to make a compact computer with screen and keyboard at only $1,000 each. Jobs told him to just create the Macintosh and not think of the cost. Eventually, Raskin lost Macintosh. Jobs was able to find an engineer to make the device work on a more expensive but smarter microprocessor. Mac came out with even better mouse and graphic interface than Lisa. Jobs was not only an intelligent engineer, he was also a genius designer. To him, product design is a work of art. Simple is sophisticated became the motto of Mac and Apple as a whole. He wanted Mac to come in a small package and look high-tech from inside out. Aside from this, he was also precise about the art behind the windows, icons, fonts, and even the external packaging of Mac. After countless proposals and revisions, Jobs made the whole design team sign on a piece of paper. He made all 50 signatures engraved inside every single Macintosh. They celebrated the completed design of Mac with a toast. Microsoft, Bill Gates, and Steve Jobs had an agreement to release Microsoft software as apps bundled with the Macintosh. The programs must carry the Apple logo, but this partnership never pushed through. During the talks, Gates and Jobs' personalities would often clash. Gates came from a very different background than Jobs. His father was a lawyer, and his mother was a civic leader. He was the tech geek at his elite private school, but unlike Jobs, he was never involved in pranks. Gates was studying at Harvard when he dropped out to start his own software company. Jobs was an intuitive perfectionist who was sometimes rude. Bill Gates, meanwhile, was always practical, disciplined, and methodical. Interestingly, both men were born in 1955. They were both college dropouts who came to revolutionize the world of personal computers. However, Gates wanted Microsoft software to be open for various platforms. Jobs, on the other hand, wanted Apple to be exclusive. In the end, it was IBM's personal computers that benefited from their disagreement. Microsoft released the operating system DOS, and later on, Windows 1.0. Jobs was quoted to say, "The only problem with Microsoft is they just have no taste, in the sense that they don't think of original ideas and they don't bring much culture into their product." Hescient resignation. When Jobs lost the Lisa project, he was also made a non-executive member of the board. Though he owned 11% of Apple shares, he lost most of his power. In 1985, he expressed his desire to build a new company to the president John Sculley. Jobs said it would be a separate company from Apple, but would not become a competitor. Jobs named his new company Next. He asked Sculley if he could recruit 5 low-level employees with him to transfer to Next. But when Sculley got the names, he became upset with Jobs, as they were definitely not low-level. The board members thought that Jobs was being disloyal to the company and breaching his duty as chairman. They were prepared to declare war against Jobs. News about Jobs being kicked out as chairman spread in the media. He had already offered to resign when he expressed his intentions with Next. Finally, he mailed his resignation letter to the executive, Mike Markula. Part of Jobs' resignation letter read, "Subsequently, the company appears to be adopting a hostile posture toward me and the new venture. As you know, the company's recent reorganization left me with no work to do and no access even to regular management reports. I am but 30 and want still to contribute and achieve." Pixar and Toy Story. George Lucas was letting go of his computer division and looking for a buyer. A friend suggested to Jobs that he meet Ed Catmull, the head of Lucasfilm's computer division. Jobs was very interested in combining technology and creativity. When he visited the division, he was completely blown away. Primarily, the division was selling software and hardware for making digital images. On the side, it had animators creating short films. The small animation team was led by John Lasseter. Jobs immediately sealed the deal and owned 70% of the shares. The most important product of the division was the Pixar image computer. And so, the new company was named Pixar. Disney took an interest in Pixar's 3D graphic imaging software. At the time, Disney's animation department was falling apart. Pixar's software was first used in Disney's The Little Mermaid. Meanwhile, John Lasseter and Steve Jobs were brewing a story about objects having feelings. Lasseter was a talented animator who graduated from the California Institute of Art. When Toy Story became a huge success, there was confusion over whether it was a Disney film or a Pixar film. In the end, Jobs agreed with Disney on equal ownership of Toy Story and the succeeding animations. Mona and Lisa. Since the 1980s, Jobs had secretly hired detectives to find his biological parents. Eventually, he was able to track down his mother, Joanne Schiebel, in Los Angeles. Joanne had separated from his biological father, Abdul Fattah Jandali, who was Syrian. She never had a successful marriage, but she told Jobs that he had a half-sister named Mona Simpson. Jobs met Mona in New York. He was thrilled to find out that she was a novelist. He became very close with Mona, as they were both passionate about art. Jobs went to support Mona at her book release. They adored each other and became very good friends. Meanwhile, Chris-Ann Brennan and Lisa lived in a house that Jobs bought for them. He started to visit them occasionally when Lisa was 3. Jobs once said, "I didn't want to be a father, so I wasn't." When Lisa was 8, Jobs' visits became more frequent. He found out that Lisa was very smart at school and also very artistic. She was high-spirited and looked a bit like him. One day, Jobs decided to bring Lisa to Apple, surprising his colleagues. Sometimes he would pick her up, and one time he even brought Lisa on a business trip to Tokyo. However, there were still times when Jobs was very cold. Over the years, their father-daughter relationship was a roller coaster. Marriage. It was October 1989 when Steve Jobs met Laurene Powell. Jobs was invited to give a lecture at Stanford University where Powell was a new graduate from business school. They ended up sitting beside each other in the lecture. Jobs was immediately attracted to Powell. They talked for a while, and later, Jobs invited her to dinner. Laurene Powell was a smart, educated, and independent woman. She had a good sense of humor, and she was also a vegetarian. Jobs had dated several women in the past, but he was really in love with Powell. In December 1990, the couple went on vacation in Hawaii. Jobs officially proposed to Powell on Christmas Day. The two got married on March 18, 1991, in Yosemite National Park. Jobs was 36, while Powell was 27 years old. Around 50 people attended their wedding, including Jobs, Father Paul Sang, and his sister Mona. The couple settled down in a 2-story house in Palo Alto. Steve and Laurene had 3 children, Paul Reed, Erin Sienna, and Eve. Restoration. It took a while for Microsoft to figure out Mac's graphical user interface, but eventually, the company came out with Windows 3.0. Microsoft came to dominate the market upon the release of Windows 95, which at the time was the best operating system. Apple sales, meanwhile, were dropping out. Jobs thought that Scully had made Apple profit-oriented. He failed to upgrade Mac and make it affordable. The market share of Apple had fallen to 4% by 1996, from 16% in the late 1980s. Jobs approached Gil Amelio, who was the CEO of Apple. He told him of his intentions to save Apple and create a new product. It was December 20, 1996, when Amelio announced Jobs' return to Apple as an advisor. With charisma and business instincts, Jobs was eventually able to replace him as CEO. The first year of Jobs' return was tough. He had to lose old board members and find replacements. Apple lost more than $1 billion. In 1997, Jobs pushed forward Apple's Think Different campaign. He thought of good marketing and advertising strategies. He juggled his time with Pixar, Apple, and his own family. By 1998, Apple regained $309 million in profit. Both the company and Jobs went back to the game. When Jobs was in his 30s, he was kicked out of Apple, but he focused on his family, Pixar, and Next. At age 40, he thrived with the release of Toy Story and his re-entry into Apple. For the next years, he would prove that people over 40 can do more. In his 20s, Steve Jobs reinvented personal computers. He would go on to do the same with music, mobile phones, tablets, apps, books, and journalism, iMac, and Apple stores. In 1998, Jobs reinvented Macintosh with the iMac. Again, it was an all-in-one computer with a monitor and keyboard. iMac was targeted for homes and ready to use. Jobs took product launching into a new kind of theater with Macintosh. He did it again for iMac. With the price of $1,299, iMac became the fastest-selling product of Apple ever. There was no single tech store in the mall or on any main street in 1999. Jobs thought that you can't win on innovation unless you have a way to communicate with the customers. He came up with the idea of Apple retail stores. A colleague asked him one day, "Is Apple as big of a brand as Gap?" Jobs answered, "Apple is even bigger." The first Apple store ever was opened in Virginia in May 2001. With white counters and wood floors, it became a venue for all Apple products. By 2004, Apple stores had set a record in the retail industry with $1.2 billion in revenue. The Fifth Avenue store opened in Manhattan in 2006. It had Jobs' trademark minimalist design, from the glass cube to the staircase. By 2011, there were already 326 Apple stores all over the world. iTunes and iPod. In the year 2000, there were 320 million blank CDs sold in the US. People were into ripping music from CDs and putting them into their computers. Jobs had yet to innovate in the music industry. Though he put CD burners on Macs, he wanted a convenient way to transfer and listen to music. He thought that the music software available at the time, like Windows Media Player, was too complicated. Meanwhile, SoundJam was a music software developed by 2 former Apple engineers. Apple took them back and reinvented SoundJam as iTunes. Jobs launched iTunes in January 2001 with the slogan, "Rip, Mix, Burn." Jobs realized that a portable device could be partnered with iTunes to play music. While in Japan, he learned about a new product that Toshiba was developing. It was a device as tiny as a silver dollar, which could hold 5 gigabytes, equivalent to 1,000 songs. Toshiba didn't know what to do with it, and so Jobs seized the opportunity. As always, Jobs wanted Apple products to be easy to use. He figured since the iPod was small, other functions like making a playlist should be done with the computer. Then, the iPod would be synced using iTunes. Later on, Jobs communicated with the big music companies about copyright and the iTunes Store. In October 2003, Steve Jobs went for a CAT scan due to his kidney stone history. However, doctors found a tumor in his pancreas. A biopsy confirmed that the tumor was a rare type that could be removed to prevent it from spreading. However, Jobs was adamant about avoiding surgery. Instead, he relied on a vegan diet, acupuncture, and alternative treatments. His wife and close friends repeatedly urged him to undergo surgery, but he refused for 9 months. By July 2004, another CAT scan revealed tumor growth. Jobs finally agreed to surgery, removing part of his pancreas. He hoped to return to work by September, but the cancer had spread, leading him to begin chemotherapy. At Stanford's 2005 commencement speech, Jobs publicly announced that he was cancer-free. That same year, his wife threw him a surprise party for his 50th birthday, celebrating with family, friends, and colleagues. iPhone. The iPod was a global sensation. By 2005, it contributed to 45% of Apple's revenue. However, Jobs knew innovation must continue. He told the board that, just like digital cameras, the iPod could become obsolete if mobile phones began incorporating music players. Jobs wanted Apple to create its own phone, not just with a camera, but also as a music player. Initially, he explored a partnership with Motorola, but he was unsatisfied with their quality. He believed existing cell phones were terrible and saw a huge market opportunity. Around the same time, a Microsoft engineer was developing a tablet PC. However, the engineer kept discussing the classified project publicly. Microsoft's tablet relied on a stylus, but Jobs wanted something purely touchscreen. He asked Apple's engineers if they could design a fully touch-based phone. When they finally presented the iPhone design, Jobs immediately said, "This is the future." Cancer recurred. By 2008, Jobs' cancer worsened. He suffered from severe pain and eating disorders. Jobs had always been obsessed with extreme diets and fasting since his teenage years. Even during his battle with cancer, he remained very selective about food, causing him to lose 40 pounds. When Jobs unveiled the iPhone 3G, the media focused on his weight loss instead of the product. This led to a sharp decline in Apple's stock price within a month. By January 2009, Jobs agreed to take a medical leave. In March, he underwent a liver transplant, but doctors discovered tumors had spread to his liver. Meanwhile, Apple made arrangements for leadership in his absence. Tim Cook, Apple's operations manager, reassured investors, "We believe that we are on the face of the earth to make great products, and that's not changing. We are constantly focusing on innovating, regardless of who is in what job. Those values are so embedded in this company that Apple will do extremely well." Despite his deteriorating health, Jobs was relentless. In 2010, he returned to Apple and continued working on the iPad, iPad 2, and iCloud. Cancer did not stop him from innovating. Last board meeting. By 2011, Steve Jobs' doctors discovered that his cancer had spread to his bones and other organs. He suffered from pain, weight loss, eating disorders, sleep problems, and mood swings. Although he had many projects still in mind, Jobs had to stay home with his family. In August, Jobs invited Walter Isaacson, his biographer, to visit him. He wanted to show him photographs for the book and shared stories about people he had met: Bill Gates, President Obama, and others. Though he was too weak to leave his bed, his mind remained sharp. As Isaacson was leaving, Jobs confided in him about his biggest concern regarding the biography. Then he admitted, "I wanted my kids to know me. I wasn't always there for them, and I wanted them to know why and to understand what I did. Also, when I got sick, I realized other people would write about me if I died, and they wouldn't know anything. They'd get it all wrong. So I wanted to make sure someone heard what I had to say." On August 24, 2011, Jobs attended his final Apple board meeting. He read aloud a letter he had been revising for weeks. "I have always said if there ever came a day when I could no longer meet my duties and expectations as Apple's CEO, I would be the first to let you know. Unfortunately, that day has come." Conclusion: Steve Jobs was intense, driven, and brutally honest. He divided people into two categories. They were either geniuses or idiots. He saw competitors as either terrible or exceptional. His direct and unfiltered approach made him both loved and feared by employees. Jobs was obsessive about control. He insisted that the Mac operating system remain exclusive to Apple, even if it meant losing profits to Microsoft. He prioritized product quality over everything else, ensuring Apple's design, hardware, software, and customer experience were all perfectly aligned. Instead of giving consumers what they wanted, Jobs anticipated what they needed, before they even knew it themselves. His vision and obsession with perfection led to Apple's greatest innovations. As Apple's motto states, "Think different." Jobs believed that companies decline when they focus too much on profit and forget their purpose. He emphasized that real companies last because they stand for something greater. That was his vision for Apple. For 3 decades, Jobs kept moving forward. Apple II and Macintosh revolutionized personal computing. Pixar changed the animation industry. iTunes and iPod helped save the music industry from piracy. iPhone and iPad combined business and entertainment into portable devices. iCloud made seamless data synchronization possible. The world lost Steve Jobs, but his legacy endures. Apple and Pixar continue to blend technology and art, just as he envisioned. One key lesson from his life: keep moving, keep improving, and success will follow.